December 27, 2007, Rawalpindi, Pakistan. Benazir Bhutto rises through the open sunroof of her white armored Toyota. It is 5:17 in the afternoon. Minutes earlier, she addressed thousands of supporters at a rally in Liaquat National Bagh. The crowd chants her name. The winter sun glares off her white headscarf. She waves. Then, 3 gunshots crack through the air. The footage shakes. Benazir collapses into the vehicle. A split second later, a deafening roar tears the street apart. A suicide bomber detonates his vest near the car. The explosion kills 20 people instantly. Smoke swallows the scene. Debris rains down on the asphalt. The woman who challenged generals, survived exile, and led a nuclear nation is slumped on the back seat. Blood stains the upholstery. Why did she return to the country? She knew the risks. Intelligence agencies warned of assassination squads. But her need to reclaim power was stronger than her instinct for self-preservation. This wasn't just an attack on a politician. It was an execution of hope. How did a young aristocrat, educated in the halls of Harvard and Oxford, become the primary target of terrorists? And what do her final moments reveal about the deadly price of politics in a state torn between democracy and military rule? Stay until the end. We will reveal the secret letter Benazir wrote before her death. It contained instructions that would secure her dynasty's future. But first, we have a mission. Our goal is 1 million subscribers. It is a high bar, but with your support, we will reach it. Subscribe now, hit the like button, join the investigation. The story begins decades earlier, June 21st, 1953, Karachi. Benazir Bhutto enters the world. She is born into the maternity ward of one of South Asia's most formidable dynasties. Her father is Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, her mother, Nusrat Isfahani. They are the royalty of Pakistan without the crowns. Benazir grows up on the sprawling estates of Sindh. Servants, manicured gardens, and heavy iron gates define her world. At first glance, a life of pampering and luxury. But in reality, a rigorous training ground for high-stakes leadership. There were no idle games. From an early age, her father immersed her in the shark tank of international diplomacy. She didn't just meet visitors, she studied them. Famous figures walked through the Bhutto residence: Zhou Enlai, Henry Kissinger, Hubert Humphrey. The archive photos show a solemn 9-year-old girl standing beside world leaders. She listens. She observes the posture of power. She learns how deals are made in smoke-filled rooms. 1967, events accelerate. Her father, Zulfikar, founds the Pakistan People's Party, the PPP. He drafts a manifesto that electrifies the poor. The slogan is simple and hard. Islam is our faith, democracy is our politics, socialism is our economy. All power to the people. Benazir is only 14 years old. Most teenagers are worrying about school exams. Benazir walks into the party office and signs the membership papers. She becomes a card-carrying activist before she can drive. Politics was not just the family business, it was the air she breathed. But privilege comes with a target on your back. The young girl did not yet know that this exposure would cost her everything. The formation of a leader had begun, and her enemies were already watching. 1969, 16 years old. That was the age of Benazir Bhutto when she boarded the plane. She left the heat of Pakistan for the bitter winters of Massachusetts. Her father, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, used his diplomatic leverage. He pulled strings to secure her early admission to Radcliffe College at Harvard. She was younger than her classmates. She was alone. She arrived in a country on fire. The United States was not a safe haven. It was a battlefield. The Vietnam War was at its absolute peak. The news cycles were filled with body counts and protests. Robert Kennedy was dead. Martin Luther King had been assassinated just a year prior. The atmosphere was thick with tension. The footage shows students marching through tear gas on American streets. Benazir watched from the sidelines. She witnessed the anti-war movements and the fight for civil rights. But initially, she did not join. She broke down. One student reported that Benazir spent her first semester in isolation. She locked her dorm room door. She wept for hours. She fought to adapt to a culture that felt alien and hostile. But this weakness did not last. Years later, she would look back on Harvard differently. She called them 4 of the happiest years of her life. The crying stopped. The observation began. She realized a fundamental truth. If the system is broken, you do not accept it. You fix it. Her generation believed they could save the world. Benazir studied the mechanics of civil resistance. She saw how ordinary citizens could paralyze a government. These were not just academic theories, they were weapons. She packed these lessons into her luggage to take back to Pakistan. 1973. Events accelerated. After graduating from Harvard, she crossed the Atlantic. She enrolled at Oxford University to study philosophy, politics, and economics. This was the traditional training ground for the elite. In the frame, the ancient dust-filled debating chambers of the Oxford Union. She did not just attend, she dominated. Benazir achieved a historical milestone. She became the first Asian woman elected president of the Oxford Union Society. This was the same podium that had forged countless British prime ministers. A biographer later noted that this period was likely the most carefree of her entire life. At first glance, a privileged student enjoying the West, but in reality, a future leader sharpening her blade. The tranquility was an illusion. It was about to end. Why did she leave this safety? She had a degree in freedom, but her destiny was tied to the chaos at home. Her Western education had given her rhetoric and logic. Now, she had to use them against Islamic military generals and hardened fundamentalists. She returned to a Pakistan that was crumbling. The carefree days were gone, the vacation was over. June 1977. That was the date Benazir Bhutto stepped back onto Pakistani soil. She held a degree from Oxford and a clear plan for the future. She intended to join the office of her father, Prime Minister Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, and learn the art of governance. It seemed like the start of a dynasty, but barely days after her arrival, the capital filled with the sound of heavy engines. July 5, 1977. The military struck. General Muhammad Zia-ul-Haq, the very man Zulfikar had appointed to lead the army, turned his forces against the state. He initiated a swift coup. Soldiers surrounded the prime minister's residence. Zulfikar was taken into custody. Why did the general panic? Initially, the military detained Zulfikar for a single month. Upon his release, he did not hide. He went to the people. The footage shows massive crowds flooding the streets, chanting the former prime minister's name. Zia watched the newsreels and realized a hard truth. As long as Bhutto was free, the coup was in danger. In September, the arrests began again. This time, the regime did not use political charges. They accused him of a 1974 political murder. Legal experts watched in disbelief. It was described as one of the most blatant judicial scandals in the region's history. The authorities bypassed the lower courts entirely. The case went straight to the Supreme Court of Lahore. This maneuver stripped Bhutto of his primary right to appeal. At first glance, a standard legal proceeding, but in reality, a calculated execution. The interim judge assigned to the case was Malvi Mushtaq Hussain. He was not impartial. He was a known enemy of the Bhutto family. The regime recalled him from a trip abroad specifically for this trial. Hussain made his intentions clear to a journalist friend. "If I don't judge the case, no other judge will hang Bhutto." March 18, 1978, the gavel fell. Zulfikar Ali Bhutto was sentenced to death for the murder of Nawab Muhammad Ahmad Khan. The defense fought back. The case moved to the Supreme Court for final review. In February 1979, the court delivered its verdict. The death sentence was confirmed by a margin of 4 votes to 3. It was not a clean decision. Ramsey Clark, the former United States Attorney General representing Bhutto, exposed the mechanics of the ruling to the New York Times. He revealed that 2 judges who supported Bhutto were prevented from attending the session. The methods used to block them were questionable. If they had been present, the vote would have flipped. But the numbers were rigged. Telegrams piled up on General Zia's desk. World leaders from every continent pleaded for clemency. Colonel Muammar Gaddafi dispatched his own prime minister from Libya on an emergency flight to negotiate Zulfikar's release. Zia did not listen. He dismissed the global outcry as nothing more than trade union activity between politicians. April 4th, 1979. Rawalpindi Central Prison. The sun had not yet risen. The prison superintendent stood before the cell and read the final warrant. Colonel Rafiuddin stood nearby, observing every movement. He looked for fear. He found none. The colonel later reported, "I didn't see any signs of panic on Mr. Bhutto's face. Instead, he was calm, relaxed, and had a smile on his face." The trapdoor opened. Zulfikar Ali Bhutto was hanged. His body was removed swiftly and buried in the family mausoleum at Garhi Khuda Bakhsh. Far away, Benazir spent the night in confinement. There was no goodbye, just the cold walls and unbearable anguish. It took 44 years for the truth to be official. In March 2024, the Supreme Court of Pakistan finally admitted that Zulfikar Ali Bhutto was denied a fair trial. A correction for the history books, but useless for the dead. For Benazir in 1979, there was no justice. There was only the brutal certainty that the price of politics in Pakistan was measured in blood. How does a 25-year-old Oxford graduate react to the state-sanctioned murder of her father? She did not break. This tragedy forged the most challenging political leader Pakistan has ever known. Ascension, 25 years old. That was the age when the legacy fell into her hands. Benazir Bhutto took command of the Pakistan People's Party immediately after her father's execution in 1979. The regime responded with force. The next few years became a blur of iron bars and isolation. She spent nearly 6 years in captivity or exile, solitary confinement, house arrest, a lonely apartment in London. The military generals stated their goal clearly: break the girl's spirit. They failed. Why did she return to the lion's den? It would have been safer to stay in Europe, but the thirst for democracy outweighed the fear of prison. From 1984 to 1986, she waited in Great Britain. Then she moved. Bhutto returned to Pakistan alongside her mother, Nusrat. The footage shows a sea of people flooding the streets to greet their convoy. She led the democratic opposition against the dictatorship. Her weapons were sharp: Western education, oratorical skill, personal charisma. She became a symbol the military could not erase. Events accelerated. August 17, 1988. General Zia died in an air disaster. The circumstances remained mysterious to this day. Pakistan held its breath. The death of the dictator opened the door. Elections were convened on December 1, 1988. At 35, Benazir Bhutto shattered the glass ceiling. She became the first woman to lead a modern Muslim state. The context was unprecedented. She took the oath just 3 months after giving birth. She was the first head of government to rule while caring for a newborn. At first glance, a triumph of progress, but in reality, a target on her back. Historical archives preserve the hatred. The reaction was mixed and volatile. Benazir later recalled the vitriol. The fundamentalists screamed that a woman had usurped a man's place. They claimed she committed heresy. They said she should be dead. In the frame, angry crowds shouting slogans against her rule. These were not just words. Powerful forces worked in the dark corners of Islamabad. The military and intelligence agencies undermined her every move. Her first government survived less than 2 years. The question remained: how would she react when they came to take it all away? The power struggle had only just begun. 1990. That was the year the government fell. How did Benazir Bhutto react when power was stripped away for the first time? Most leaders would accept defeat, but Bhutto went on the offensive. Her first term as prime minister began in 1988. It ended abruptly just 2 years later. President Ghulam Ishaq Khan signed the dismissal order. He accused her of rampant corruption. He cited incompetent governance. Bhutto lost the subsequent elections in 1990, but she did not retreat. She reorganized her party. She rallied the crowds. 1993. Bhutto returned. She took the oath for a second time. She served until 1996. During these years, she pushed for economic privatizations. She attempted to advance women's rights. The world watched a historic moment in 1990. Bhutto gave birth to her second daughter. She became the first elected leader in history to give birth while holding office. At first glance, a symbol of progress. But in reality, her administration was paralyzed by instability. events accelerated. President Farouk Laghari watched the chaos. In 1996, he repeated history. He dismissed her government using the same accusations, but this time the charges were heavier. It wasn't just mismanagement, it was theft. $5 billion. That was the sum Pakistani investigators claimed had vanished from government accounts. The investigation went global. British and American agents uncovered a paper trail. They found documents linking multi-million-dollar properties to state contracts. They mapped a network of bank accounts across the world used to hide the funds. The spotlight turned to her husband, Asif Ali Zardari. The public gave him a nickname, Mr. 10%. It implied he took a cut of every government deal. He spent 8 years in prison facing corruption charges. The footage shows Zardari being led away by police, surrounded by a shouting mob. Bhutto rejected every allegation. She claimed her accusers simply wanted to expel her from power. In 1998, she made a choice. She gathered her files and left. She went into self-exile. For the next decade, she lived between the luxury of Dubai and London. But the legal pressure mounted. An investigation culminated in a 2003 conviction in a Swiss court. How could someone accused of stealing billions return to the political stage? What geopolitical forces prepared to give Benazir Bhutto one last chance? The calendar turned to 2007. The fatal return began. October 18, 2007. The exile officially ended. Under immense pressure from supporters within the United States government, President Pervez Musharraf signed the papers. He granted full amnesty to Benazir Bhutto and her husband, Asif Ali Zardari. Decades of corruption charges evaporated with a stroke of a pen. It was a political reset, but the agreement signed by the Americans did not guarantee safety. Why did Bhutto return despite the danger? Islamic militants had already flooded the channels with death threats, but the promise of power was stronger. She planned to run in the general elections of 2008. She landed in Karachi. The footage shows a sea of humanity. Hundreds of thousands of supporters fill the streets to welcome her. Flags wave, people chant. But the celebration turned into a massacre. A suicide bomber breached the perimeter. The explosion ripped through the welcome convoy. The sound was deafening. Shrapnel tore through the crowd. 136 people died instantly. 450 were injured. Bhutto escaped by seconds. Just as the blast wave hit, she ducked behind the armored plating of her vehicle. She survived the impact, but she knew this was only the beginning. The threat followed her to Islamabad, 1 in the morning. December 27, 2007. A high-ranking visitor arrived at her home. It was Lieutenant General Nadeem Taj, the director of the ISI, Pakistan's main intelligence agency. He did not send a subordinate. He came personally. The message was specific. General Taj warned her that suicide bombers were already in position in Rawalpindi. They planned to strike before, during, or after her election rally. At first glance, a helpful warning. But in reality, Bhutto saw it as a threat. She suspected Taj was trying to manipulate her into canceling the event. She looked at the intelligence chief and gave a sharp counter-order. If he knew about the bombers, he should arrest them immediately. Taj refused. He claimed that acting now would expose his sources. The meeting ended in a stalemate. Benazir knew she was a walking target. She began to document the conspiracy. 2 days prior, she wrote a formal letter to President Musharraf. She listed the names of the people plotting against her. On the morning of her murder, she spoke to Afghan President Hamid Karzai. She told him bluntly that Pakistan's own intelligence services were conspiring to kill her. She even left a digital trail. She sent an email to CNN journalist Wolf Blitzer. The instructions were precise. If she was killed, the responsibility lay with Musharraf. The warning signs were flashing red. The carnage in Karachi had already proved the militants' capability. Why did she go to the rally? Perhaps it was political ambition. Perhaps it was a genuine commitment to democracy. She ignored the advice. She entered the vehicle. The decision was made. December 27, 2007. The final countdown began at noon in Rawalpindi. Benazir Bhutto's convoy moved through the city toward Liaquat National Bagh. The destination was symbolic. The risk was absolute. She arrived at the park and was quickly ushered to the stage. 10,000 people waited in the dust and heat. Benazir took the microphone. She spoke for 30 minutes. It was not just a campaign speech, it was a declaration of lineage. The footage shows Benazir raising her hands, her face determined, the crowd surging against the barriers. She proclaimed her loyalty to dynastic politics. She referred to herself as the daughter of Zulfikar. She invoked her father's name no less than 17 times. She told the roaring crowd that her father found greatness by fighting military dictators. She was doing the same. At the end of the speech, the rally dispersed. Benazir descended from the platform. She entered her white armored vehicle. It was a safe zone. Bulletproof glass, reinforced steel. But she made a fatal mistake. At first glance, a gesture of connection, but in reality, a breach of security. She stood up through the sunroof to wave to the supporters surrounding the car. It was 10 minutes past 6 in the evening. The sun had set. The floodlights were on. Suddenly, shots rang out. A gunman approached the vehicle. He fired 3 times at close range. Was it the bullets that killed her? It seemed so, but the chaos had only just started. Immediately after the shots, a suicide bomber detonated his vest. The explosion ripped through the crowd. The blast force slammed against the armored car. 23 people died instantly. Limbs and debris scattered across the road. The air filled with smoke and the smell of cordite. The driver floored the accelerator. The car rushed to Rawalpindi General Hospital. Doctors fought to find a pulse. It was useless. At 16 minutes past 6, Benazir Bhutto was declared dead. But the controversy did not end with the funeral. On February 8, 2008, Scotland Yard investigators released their findings. The verdict was cold. They concluded she was not killed by a bullet. They claimed the force of the explosion threw her against the lever of the sunroof, a skull fracture, blunt force trauma. The public refused to believe it. Why did they reject the report? Because the video evidence suggested a sniper, but the official narrative stood firm. Benazir had cheated death before. Only 2 months earlier, she survived a massive bombing in Karachi that killed 180 people. She walked away from the carnage then. But this time, there was no escape. The investigation stalled, theories multiplied, the file remains open. Who really killed Benazir Bhutto? 0 definitive names. That was the final result of the global inquiry. An independent investigation commission of the United Nations, appointed by Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, examined the debris of the assassination. They acted at the explicit request of the Pakistani government. Yet, the report reached no conclusion about the organizers or the sponsors behind the attack. Why did the trail go cold? It wasn't a lack of leads. It was a labyrinth of misinformation. The Ministry of the Interior of Pakistan moved quickly. They claimed to possess irrefutable evidence. They pointed the finger directly at Al-Qaeda. Brigadier Javed Iqbal Chima addressed the media. He stated that the government had recorded an intelligence interception. In the audio, the voice of Al-Qaeda leader Baitullah Masood is heard. He congratulated his staff on carrying out the cowardly act. But this was only the surface. Masood denied the accusation. He never faced trial. In August 2009, an American drone strike obliterated him. The key suspect was dead. But the UN investigation revealed something much more sinister than a single terrorist cell. The report discovered a systemic collapse. The security arrangements by federal authorities were not just weak, they were fatally insufficient. The locations assigned to protect Benazir Bhutto were porous. The commission found that subsequent investigations into her death were harmed intentionally. Evidence was washed away. It involved a calculated cover-up. At first glance, incompetence. But in reality, sabotage. Benazir Bhutto walked into a trap. The commission noted she faced serious threats in Pakistan from every direction. These included Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, and local jihadist groups. But there was a fourth threat. Potentially, elements of the Pakistani establishment itself. Despite these warnings, the police looked the other way. The investigation into her murder focused solely on pursuing lower-level operators. They chased men supposedly linked to Baitullah Masood. The commission emphasized a critical failure. Investigators ruled out the possibility of involving the Pakistani establishment. They ignored the victim's own words. On October 16, 2007, Bhutto sent a letter to General Musharraf. In it, she identified 3 specific people as threats. The investigators never questioned them. General Pervez Musharraf was president at the time of the suicide attack in Rawalpindi. The report noted that the federal government lacked a comprehensive security plan. The negligence was specific. On October 22, 2007, the government ordered strict security measures for 2 other former prime ministers. They failed to direct provincial authorities to provide Benazir with the same protection. It was unforgivable. After the murder, President Musharraf denied responsibility. He claimed Bhutto should have received more security, but argued her death was mainly her fault. He insisted she took unnecessary risks. He blamed her for not leaving the rally quickly enough. The footage shows the chaos of that day. Rahman Malik, head of Benazir Bhutto's civil security team, acted strangely. After the attack, he did not secure the site. He simply left the scene. He got into his vehicle and drove to Islamabad. A decade later, Malik said he was following police instructions. Farhatullah Babar, Benazir's long-term spokesperson, sat in the backup car. He watched the lead vehicle disappear into the dust. He stated that allowing the car to leave that day was the greatest regret of his life. The controversial legacy remained unsolved. December 28, 2007. Hundreds of thousands of unarmed men flooded the streets of Garhi Khuda Bakhsh. They came to pay their last respects to Benazir Bhutto. The dust of the southern province of Sindh mixed with the sweat of the crowd. It was a sea of mourners. Inside the family mausoleum, the atmosphere was heavy. Her husband, Asif Ali Zardari, stood by the grave. Her 3 children and her sister Sanam stood beside him. They lowered Benazir into the earth next to her father, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. The dynasty was reunited in death, but outside the walls, grief turned into rage. Benazir's death triggered a wave of violence across Pakistan. Protests erupted in every major city. The footage shows smoke rising from burning tires and government buildings. Mobs clashed with police battalions. They set trains on fire. They stormed banks. The country was paralyzed. The Pakistan Electoral Commission had no choice. They looked at the burning streets and postponed the general elections for a month. Then came the reading of the political will. Why did Benazir choose a teenager to lead? It seemed reckless, but she knew the power of the bloodline. In her final written instructions, she identified her son, Bilawal Bhutto Zardari, as her successor. He was the new chairman of the PPP. At the time, Bilawal was only 19. He was not a seasoned politician. He was a student graduating from Oxford. The party leadership made a pragmatic deal. His father, Asif Ali Zardari, would serve as interim president. He would hold power until Bilawal finished his studies in England. Events accelerated. The PPP entered into a wide coalition. They rode the wave of sympathy to a crushing victory in the 2008 elections. By September 2008, Asif Ali Zardari was elected president of Pakistan. It was a bitter irony. The husband, frequently accused of corruption, had finally achieved the position his wife could never hold. The legacy of Benazir Bhutto remains a battlefield. At first glance, a global icon, but in reality, a divisive figure. Pakistan's Islamist groups never accepted her. Conservative forces despised her gender and her agenda. They accused her of being politically inexperienced. They fought her secular policies. And then there was the money. Accusations of tax evasion and kickbacks involved billions of dollars. These cases were never fully clarified. But the archives show another side. In the early years of her career, her popularity was electric. She attracted the full support of the international community. The West saw her as a champion of democracy. She became a symbol of women's rights in a society strictly dominated by men. She was not a saint. The corruption files were substantial. She appointed close family members to critical state positions. Her foreign policy left dark scars. It was during her second term, in the 1990s, that the Taliban rose to power. Supported by Pakistani intelligence, they marched into Kabul. This was a fact the West often ignored. Yet, she remained a civilian leader willing to challenge the military complex. She knew the risks. She knew she would return to Pakistan to die. The letters she wrote before her arrival prove it. She listed the names of her enemies. She ignored the warnings from security agencies. She received death threats daily. He said his return in 2007 was a death sentence. Why did she do it? Personal ambition, blind dynastic loyalty, or the genuine belief that democracy was worth her life? The answer lies buried in the mausoleum in Sindh. 2 years of investigation. That is what it took for the United Nations to reach a conclusion regarding the assassination. The findings were blunt. General Pervez Musharraf carried the political and moral weight of the murder. Why? Because the state failed to act. Benazir Bhutto had requested specific reinforced security. It was urgent. It was her right. But the regime denied her the protection she needed. What drove her to take such a risk? Personal ambition, blind loyalty to her name, or a genuine belief that democracy was worth a bullet? Pakistan remains trapped in a deadly rhythm. The military pulls the strings from the shadows, civilians step onto the stage and pretend to govern, and extremists wait in the wings with suicide vests, ready to terrorize anyone who challenges the script. 10 years after her death, analysts looked at the landscape. The verdict was clear. The void she left in Pakistani politics remained empty. At first glance, a functional state, but in reality, a vacuum of leadership. Benazir Bhutto was laid to rest. In the footage, the iconic white headscarf that became her trademark is visible one last time. This case goes beyond the banality of evil. It is a lesson on the fragility of power. In nations with weak institutions, leaders are not voted out. They are eliminated. Dynasties do not just inherit political parties. They inherit targets on their backs. The children receive the bullets destined for their parents. The Bhutto bloodline paid the ultimate price. Her father faced the hangman's noose. Her brothers died under mysterious circumstances. Her mother was murdered. Benazir knew the history. She understood the pattern. The warnings were specific. "Do not return," they told her. "You will be a walking corpse." She heard them. She understood them. And she boarded the plane anyway. Was she a martyr for democracy? Or was she a victim of her own hubris? Her final actions provide a clue. Before that flight in October 2007, she took precautions. She sat down and wrote a political will. It was an insurance policy against assassination. She handed the sealed document to her confidant, the journalist Mark Siegel. The instruction was simple. "Open this only if I die." When the seal was broken, the contents were explosive. She named 3 specific individuals. These were not street thugs. They were high-ranking figures within the Pakistani intelligence apparatus. She wrote a chilling sentence. "Nothing is as dangerous as politics in Pakistan." Nothing. Events accelerated. There was more. 2 days before the attack, she wrote directly to General Musharraf. The letter detailed the threats. She formally requested an investigation into the security officers she suspected of plotting against her. The general did not reply. The letter gathered dust until the explosion in Rawalpindi brought it to light. Archive footage reveals a tense interview with David Frost. It was recorded weeks before her return. Frost asked the hard question: why risk it all? Why walk into the line of fire? Benazir did not blink. Her answer was sharp. "I couldn't die a better death than dying for the cause of democracy." She believed that a cause worth dying for is one where a contribution can be made, and her contribution was under attack. Frost pushed harder. "But you have children. Don't you think about them?" The mention of her family made her pause, but only for a second. She replied calmly, "Of course I think of them every day." But then she spoke of the millions of other children, those growing up under the boot of military dictatorship or the threat of fundamentalism. Someone had to stand up. She refused to be a coward living comfortably in exile. She chose the arena. And she paid the price. "Better to die a hero than live as a coward in exile." These words are now cut into the marble of her mausoleum in Garhi Khuda Bakhsh. Every year, on the anniversary of her death, the site transforms. Hundreds of thousands of Pakistanis flood the grounds. They chant, they weep, and they pay tribute to the slain leader. But the emotion on the ground hides a cold reality. Almost 2 decades after the assassination of Benazir Bhutto, the country remains trapped. The cycle does not break. Why does instability persist? It seems the voters decide, but the true power lies elsewhere. The military continues to cast a long shadow over the throne. Civilian leaders are elected with hope. Then, they are deposed with force. Democracy here is not a system. It is a fragile experiment under constant threat. Today, her son stands at the podium. Bilawal Bhutto Zardari is now in his 30s. He leads the Pakistan People's Party. He wears the name like armor. It is simultaneously a political shield and a painted target. In every speech, he invokes the ghost of his mother. He summons the memory of his grandfather. The dynasty continues. In Pakistan, a recognizable surname is worth more than 1,000 political manifestos. His father, Asif Ali Zardari, took a different path. He held the presidency from 2008 to 2013. He managed to complete a full mandate, a rare feat in this region, but the whispers never stopped. Accusations of corruption dogged him for decades. The family's legacy remains stained by questionable wealth accumulated during years of absolute power. But money didn't save them from violence. The investigators never definitively identified the person who signed Benazir's death warrant. 5 men stood trial before the Pakistani Anti-Terrorism Court. 5 men were acquitted in 2017. The reason was simple: lack of evidence. The footage shows, moments after the blast, fire trucks roll in. They do not secure the area. They turn on the hoses. High-pressure water blasts the crime scene. Blood, shell casings, and DNA evidence are washed into the gutter within hours. At first glance, sheer incompetence. But in reality, a deliberate cover-up. The United Nations did not mince words. They called the investigation deliberately sabotaged. The list of suspects is a gallery of dangerous players: Islamic militants, rogue elements within the intelligence services, political rivals with deep military connections. The truth remains buried under layers of state secrets and political convenience. What we know for sure is this: Benazir Bhutto bought a one-way ticket. She returned to Pakistan knowing she would be dead. The warnings were not vague, they were explicit. She had already survived one assassination attempt in Karachi. She brushed off the dust and kept moving. On the morning of her death, she received fresh intelligence. Suicide bombers were positioned, snipers were waiting. And yet, she went to the rally. She climbed the steps. This was not naivety. It was a cold, calculated choice. She believed her martyrdom would serve the cause of democracy more powerfully than her survival ever could. History has yet to write the final verdict on Benazir Bhutto. She remains one of the most controversial figures of the 21st century. But her story is not just a biography. It is a permanent alert. It demonstrates the deadly price of leadership in nations with fragile institutions. Democracy is not guaranteed. It must be defended. Sometimes, the cost is life itself. Her death serves as a grim reminder of what happens when generals and extremists decide that bullets speak louder than votes.